Right now, we're going to move on to our next storyteller, who is Larry Thompson. Larry Thompson has been in front of audiences for more than 30 years. Larry is at home helping the audience laugh, learn, and let loose. He has told stories on mountaintops and in valleys from New Mexico to South Carolina, at many large and small places in between. Larry tells cowboy tales, personal stories, and homegrown tales that guarantee to make the audience smile. I can attest to that. He has published 4 books of his own stories, including his newest book, Cowboy Spirit, a collection of Western poetry. He is a previous champion of the Houston's Liars Contest and is current reigning runner-up for the Texas State Liars Contest. Larry was voted least forgettable performer at the 2012 Trembling Hills Rehab Friends and Fish Cook-Off. Least forgettable performer, I'll take it. I would love that.
Least forgettable, that's exactly right. One of those backhanded compliments, I think.
So Larry, our cowboy poet from Texas, coming to us live. And please welcome Larry Thompson to our virtual.
Thank you. Jill, I'm real happy to be here tonight. As they say with this Corona stuff, I'm happy to be anywhere. And I am coming to you from Seguin, Texas, right outside San Antonio, but I do have my Big Ten representation there for Purdue University right there. Just want to give a shout out to any Boilermakers who might be watching on the Facebook Live and all the rest of it, well, it is Chicago, so Northwestern, you're okay too, I guess. But I want to share a story with you this evening. It's a story of 2 extraordinary gifts. Now, the story begins in December of 1976. Now, you may recall, if you're this old, that was the year of the bicentennial. It was also the year that Apple Computers was founded. Also the year that Jimmy Carter became the president. And unfortunately, it was the year that my brother and I lost our father. Now, that cold December in 76, me and my brother played together in the living room of our house. Now, our house was very tiny, and it was they called it a parsonage. Now, a parsonage is a house that's owned by the church, but they loan out to the family of the preacher. And since my daddy was a preacher, well, we got to live in that parsonage. But Dad had died in April of that year after a long battle with cancer. And so my mother had been leading our little family all by herself there in that home. Now, Christmas was approaching, and my brother and I were consumed with thoughts of the latest toys and games. I wanted a Star Trek phaser battle set, and my brother wanted a Stretch Armstrong. But my mother's thoughts were consumed by the notion of finding a new house for all of us in that tiny town that we lived in. And we'd been living there for about 10 years. And it was about halfway between Indianapolis and Terre Haute on the west side of the state. Now, she didn't want to uproot the family. She didn't want us changing schools, all that sort of thing. But in that small town of 200 or so people, the search had pretty much been unsuccessful to that point. And the patience of the church was miraculous. They continued to let us stay there, but unbeknownst to the 2 of us, they had just given my mom the news that she only had a few more weeks to be in the home. They had found a new preacher, and he would be moving his family into the home right after Christmas. Now, as we played together that afternoon, there was a knock at the door, and I ran to the door, opened it up, and on the other side of the door was a very curious-looking man. He was skinny, and he just wasn't dressed right for December. He didn't even have a jacket on. I didn't recognize him at all, which is pretty strange in a town of about 200 folks. And being the preacher's kid, you just know everyone. And I said hello, and he said, "Is your mother home?" And I said, "Sure, I'll go get her." And I ran to get my mom. She went out the door and talked to the man on our front stoop for a few minutes. Well, me and my brother, we peeked in through the window to see, if we could tell what they was talking about. And a few minutes later, they came inside, and Mom told us that me and my brother could go out and play for a while. And now we didn't question that, but we definitely did heed that. And it was a rare opportunity to get outside in that chilly December afternoon, especially when there wasn't any snow. When we came back home later that evening, Mom met us at the door, and her words were calm and steady as always. And she just said, "Boys, please, let's start to pack our rooms. We'll be moving this weekend." And that was that. Now, the next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. We were packing and cleaning and moving and unpacking, and the new house was so cool. It was larger. It was 2-story. We each had our own room. There was even a special room downstairs that was totally empty and big enough for my daddy's pool table to be indoors. Now, the moving chores weren't totally done in time for Christmas, but there was a tree and some of the trimmings. Seems like those boxes were easy to reach during the move. And so we were able to set that up. And there was one icy afternoon that gave us plenty of time indoors to do a bit of decorating. And in fact, the moving wouldn't be completed all for almost a month, but by early February, everybody's room was painted up and basically spick and span. Now, so far, I haven't mentioned any gifts. And Jill put this session together tonight about gifts. And so let me fill in that blank right now. It wasn't until about 2003, almost 30 years later, that I discovered who that stranger at the door had been. My mother never wanted to talk about it, and she didn't want to share any of the details, but I finally managed to pry it out of her one evening on the phone. His first name, as all she could remember, was Lanny. And he lived in that house that we moved into 2 blocks for probably 3-4 years. His mother was an attorney, and she lived in one of the big towns several hours away. And she'd had a lot of trouble with Lanny, and so she bought him this house in the middle of nowhere. She gave him the deed, and she just turned him loose on the world. And he lived a pretty reclusive life. No one in the town even seemed to know who he was. He filled his days and nights apparently with parties and friends and illegal substances. Now, the part about the illegal substances and the parties, that was not unnoticed by the townspeople. But other than that, no one really took any note of him. In one of Lanny's lucid moments, he had read an obituary in mid-April. The obituary had detailed the life and the laws of the local town preacher, and that lucid moment was rather short-lived, but somehow it came flooding back to him that afternoon in December when he came and knocked on our door. And the conversation that Lanny had had with my mother that afternoon revealed, in fact, that Lanny had not lived an unnoticed life in that small town after all. In fact, Lanny told of many visits by the town's preacher, my daddy. It seems that the two of them would meet in his house. And Lanny even mentioned that there might have been a baptism in his house, the best he could remember it. He said they got together all the time. We'd talk about everything, any subject that popped up. And though his life continued that twisted spiral towards what most of the self-righteous folks in the local church would have seen to end in the fiery pits of hell, Lanny had been touched by that preacher. And seeing that obituary and those details about that little family had moved him to action. He contacted his mother about his intentions, and on that December afternoon, Lanny walked to our house. and gave us his house. He gave us his house, one block over and one block down. Now, my mother had insisted on giving him some money from the insurance company, the checks, but he refused. He just gave us his house. From that day on, as far as I know, no one in town ever saw Lanny again. And it was quite a gift indeed. But I mentioned that there were two extraordinary gifts I wanted to tell you about. The second one I'll take a few liberties with. I guess I would describe it as the gift of being a good father. The good father gives of himself, even though he doesn't know what good may come from it. Like mine had given friendship and respect and understanding to the unnoticed among us. He didn't imagine any benefits for his family. He just did it anyway. And this year, as my wife and I welcomed two tiny foster kids into our home just a couple of weeks ago, and who knows how long they'll be here. But those are the two gifts that I'm remembering most this holiday season. Thank you.